All right, if folks have settled in and gotten their nibbles and beverages and all that good stuff, we can go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for coming on a gray and kind of depressing day, but hopefully our conversation together will brighten the day a bit. So just to give you a roadmap of what we're going to be doing today, the idea here is we want to follow up on where we left things during our last meeting, right? Kind of go over the ideas that came out of our previous meeting. I'll highlight a few, like a set of 3 kind of common themes and topics that came out of our discussion last month. Then Beth is going to say a few words to reiterate and kind of clarify some of the logistical and practical details of the project, kind of going over what are the constraints of resources, both in terms of finances and staff and time, right? So that when we're evaluating our ideas and thinking about program format and audience, we can also bear in mind some of the kind of logistics of how do we devise programming as arts organizations. And then we'll look at each of the topics in turn. So we'll address 3 topics and we'll spend about 25 minutes on each. And then we'll wrap up at the end and kind of look at what we've discussed and set the stage for our next and final meeting. Any questions about our roadmap or anything like that? Okay, great. Yes?
Are we going to get the full details of the grant and what that entails?
Yes, you'll be getting a lot of details, absolutely. Well, I mean, hopefully we haven't kept too much secret, but we'll try to be as, explicit as possible about kind of the nuts and bolts of how that works and what the expectations from our funder are and that sort of thing. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so when we discussed topics and themes when we last met, several consistent themes came through in our conversation, in our reflection on the field trips from the summer, as well as your individual research in the archives. So I'm gonna use the whiteboard to sort of highlight these, just so that, because I've got that teacher impulse, to write things on the board. So the first theme that we heard many of you say again and again was an interest in oral history and testimonials, right? A lot of you in your archival research were interested in the Batiendo la Olla oral history project, and you were also interested in connecting with the people and the ideas of these oral history projects and thinking about kind of where are we now, right? So the idea of oral history is one that really came through. Okay. Can you all read my handwriting? Okay, great. Okay. So that's one topic that definitely rose to the surface. The second that we saw over and over again was an interest in the visual arts, right? And arts and culture. Okay. Visual arts. Many of you, when you did your archival research, highlighted particularly Tayer's print holdings and photography holdings, and there were some questions and interest in that material. Also, HSP has some great photographic archives as well. So we wanted to highlight the importance of visual arts that came through in a lot of your comments. And then finally, the third sort of theme that rose to the surface from our discussion was the idea of mapping or a kind of visual or digital timeline of some sort. Many of you were really impressed at the African American Museum in the sort of interactive, very visual and historical timeline that they had there. So this idea of visualizing and contextualizing all of the historical and archival research that you've been doing is another kind of theme that really rose to the surface. So each of these large overarching themes has within it the possibility of exploring some of the kind of subtopics that a lot of you identified in our discussion as well, right? Topics like migration and immigration, neighborhood and community, civil rights, citizenship, gender, faith and religion, as well as neighborhood and space, right? So these sorts of overarching 3 topics have within them the possibility to really engage with all of those topics, right? So for today, what I'd like to do is hear some more about the logistics of the grant to help us think in specific terms about what sorts of formats, program formats, could these take, and how can we think about bringing in a diverse and large audience to enjoy and participate in these programs. And this is why this whole process is so valuable, because you guys are both the creators and the generators of these ideas, as well as our ideal audience for them, right? So we're really interested in, how meaningful these ideas are to you based on your experience so far in this project. So I'm gonna turn it over to Beth to say a few words about the logistics of the grant, and then we will come back together as a group to discuss each of these in turn and reflect on what kinds of formats and audiences we could have for each. Okay, thank you. Let me give you your microphone. Alrighty. Here's the clip, and here's the thing. Lovely. Probably put it on your scarf.
Yeah, so, oops, other direction though.
There we go. Great. Thank you.
Is this good for the audio, guys? Okay, great. Oh, so Randy started with asking about the grant. And first of all, I want to iterate that the grant was given for us to do an experiment in how you create audience-developed programs. So the first year of the grant really is about this group. So it's not as if the grant is yet to start. This has been the process. This has been an integral part of it. And in some ways, the end product, the programs, oddly become secondary to the process, but that doesn't mean that they aren't important, of course. And now we turn our attention to that, because the second year of the grant is about actually having, and in the grant we said 2 programs in the spring of 2019, and then the summer of 2019, when we wrap things up, we'll be pulling all the evaluation together, all the great audiovisual material that's been created as well, into an online guidebook for any other organization that might want to try an experiment like this. What's worked, what hasn't worked, that kind of thing. Now, I should preface, when I said 2 programs, when you write a grant, this is what we think will happen. That doesn't mean that's necessarily what's going to happen. And Pew, the funder, is very comfortable with us going back and saying, we learned it really should have been this way, we're going to reallocate funds. So that's not an issue. If we decide we can do 3 programs with the kind of resources we have, we can do 3 programs. So as we go through these ideas, we're not saying one of these has to drop out necessarily. It may be that we can do all 3, but we're going to talk about what the parameters of them would be in the second part of this, or the main part of this program. And at that point, something may drop out, or it may be that this is totally wrong, we need to do something totally different. But I just wanted to put that out there as the general. What I've done is create a sheet that can be used for those discussions. So as we go through each of these ideas, these are the kinds of questions that we want to address, and they're based upon the grant as well. So when it says, does it meet grant requirements? One of the things in the grant was a thematic sort of overture that all of the programs should relate to. And I've taken the language in italics straight from the grant, and it stresses neighborhoods, which we've been talking about. It also stresses the role of economic forces in transforming neighborhoods, which we have had come up in conversation. I wouldn't say it's where we've spent a lot of time, but I want to put it out there again. And then finally, conversations that relate contemporary issues of immigration and cultural identity. I think those have risen to the fore in some of our conversations. But so that's there with some follow-up questions, which really look at, specifically, does this idea get to any of these? The second piece is about audience. Today we wanted to move from general themes to specific formats, and a lot of formats came out of last week's conversation. I know it was incredibly difficult, it always is incredibly difficult, to think of an idea about a topic without already beginning to envision how you're going to present it. So some of that's already here, but we also wanted to speak more directly about audiences. Flora mentioned, you are the audience for the program. You now are sort of an expert audience, you know a little bit more about it, but think back to you before you started on pause. Would it have appealed to you, or what about it could make it appeal to you? Are there kind of secondary audiences, like you think we should reach out to high school students or to a particular neighborhood or something like that that also should come in? In the grant, we put really vague language. We will reach a diverse and large audience of artists, historians, members of the Latino community, people interested in immigration issues, those interested in Philadelphia history. The last one was sort of picking up HSPs, members, that kind of thing. So it's pretty broad, and we're asking you to narrow that. But to think about the fact that we created this group specifically to merge HSP and Tyer's audiences together. So we need a program that can appeal to both. It's not going to be successful, it only appeals to one or the other. And then finally, resources, which you've been asking a lot about, I know. And it's great. You're not all pie in the sky people. You want to bring it down. Can we really do this? The execution of the program is to be done by HSP and Tyer staff. And I do want to introduce a couple people who are here today. Chris Damiani is Director of Public Programs at HSP. And next meeting, you also will meet Monica Fonero, who's our Director of Communications, who will be working on these. And then from Tyer, we have another, now I'm gonna, Katerina, I keep getting Katerina, who's come on board there, who, along with Carmen, will be working on the Tyer side to help these happen. So we're going to be the go-to people. That doesn't mean you're cut out of it. If you would like to volunteer to help in any way, whether it's putting together a program or maybe you become the star of a program, that's wonderful. But this is the way the grant was set up. So those are the people. And people also have to do with time resources. The two programs we're doing will not be the only programs that our institutions are putting on in the spring. So obviously we don't have all the time in the world to work on them, but these are high priority. And so we will have a fair amount of time to work on them. And then in terms of funding. So in the grant, when you add up funds from all the different sort of subcategories, for the spring program, $17,200 was allotted. That was to cover things like if we were going to do an exhibit, we might want to hire a curator. If we were going to have somebody create some art, we'd create an artist or hire an artist. Supplies, if we're bringing in speakers and there's any kind of, well, there'd be honorarium, but also any kind of travel, that would be in there. And then the grant itself has cover space for these programs here and at Tyer. We had thought ideally there'd be, as I said, two programs, one here and one there. We can play with that a little bit. If we decide it makes most sense to have the program at some third spot, well, then we might have to pay a space rental fee. So that would all come out of that money. As grants move along, little pockets of money get used up, other things get expended that we didn't expect. And so this 17,000 might, we might have another one or two, we might have one less. So it's a rough number, but it gives you a sense. I would say that depending on the scope or size of these things, we could do all three. For instance, we'll be talking about formats, but if the timeline were, say, something online versus a physically built exhibit, that might make the money differ. The oral history, how many could you do, might differ. So we will work on those details. Don't let yourself feel too confined by the funding at this point. We want to share it with you. We want to be open about it. What's going to happen between now and the December meeting is those of us on the staff are going to take what comes out of today and come up with a specific proposal for how it would be done. And we will match it to the dollars at that point. And the December meeting is for you to review our work. And if we say, okay, we can do all three, let's say, but it means that the oral history can only cover, I don't know, talking to 5 people. And you say, well, then it's not worth doing. Either reallocate the money or, somehow change it around. I mean, that's the conversation we'll have in December. I think at this point, I feel confident that we can go ahead and really try to discuss these 3 and then move on from there. Are there any questions at this point about this? Is that enough information? Okay. Yes.
I want to reiterate what I said at the last meeting, which is that the information that you've all dug out from our archives is so relevant to the work and the mission that we do at Taller and at HSP that, whether it turns out to be a program now, this is information that is very valuable and hopefully will also be incorporated into programs in the future. As a matter of fact, we are exploring an opportunity with William Penn resources to create a series of memorials around the community that highlight the historical moments that have shaped, that community that we call our community. And these things that you've uncovered can be building blocks to that. So my point is, don't feel frustrated if the particular interest that you work very hard on is not reflected. Hopefully it will be in some capacity or another, but if it's not, this is important information that is valuable for both our institutions.
And thanks to all the audio recording, video recording, and transcribing that Monica's been doing, and the Google Drive, it's not like we're going to lose anything. So we'll be able in future years to go back to that information, from your research, for instance, say, oh, there was a great program about the cigar manufacturing and its history in Philadelphia. They didn't fit in here, but wouldn't that be interesting to do as its own? I mean, as an example, and it could get picked up later.
Beth, with regards to the amount that you said, approximately $17,000, if we're charging for the event, doesn't that up our budget?
Yes, it could. It's always tricky to count on admission fees in that if you counted on 100 people coming and 50 show up, you don't want to have expended that money. So I tend to like to think of that as just on the top, and that's something that has to be discussed, whether or not it makes sense to charge a fee. Increasingly, we find that people don't tend to show up for free programs. They're associating value and admission fees, and their time. So if they've paid for something, they're more apt to come than if it's free, even though they've registered. It's very frustrating, and it's really a trend of the last couple years. So it might be worth having some fee, but it may be minimal, and so wouldn't really count towards a budget too. So I would say don't worry about that side right now. It may come, but I want to put that in.
Yeah. So on the committee that is going to actually put the program together, I still don't see the youth there. And no offense, to those that are on it, but I just don't think that we will reach the youth if we don't have representation from the youth to do this. I mean, we've gotta really kind of pull the history and the today, together. And if we create programs that's just for historians, that's who's going to come, historians. But we need to make sure that the youth comes and that they're part of this to see their history, because that's really the impact of history is what today and reaching the youth. But if we create something that is just for the historians and people that are our age, then I don't think we're doing a justice to the program.
Well, that's a really valid point, and I would say then that you and any other who agrees with you as you go through talking about these, think about how you can make those engaging for that age level. Yeah. And that may also change what you want to do. You may decide or what venue you want to do it in, whether it's online or in person and that kind of thing. That's a valid point. Anything else about general logistics? Yes, Sandy?
Just curious now, we're going to, wherever we do this, it will be here and Tyre, alternating, is that?
I would, in the grant, to be simplistic, we said we will have 2 programs, 1 at each site. But that does not mean that exactly has to be how it happens. I would say that either of our organizations would like to host something because we want to be seen as appealing to the cross audience. But, let's wait and see what comes out of the discussion. I wouldn't get too hung up on that part right now.
Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
And to be
Yeah.
station, one or the other or both.
Yeah. All right, all right, you can have a seat right here. Anything else?
Yes, I have a question. Besides the 2 programs, will there be any outreach beyond the 2 institutions simultaneously? So
Outreach in the sense of
for
marketing?
Example, into schools, for example. Could there be simultaneously a project that goes into
That would have to be discussed during this conversation, if that's to be part of it, because then that would take time and money that we need to budget. Yeah.
The other question that I have for you is, we are thinking about this programming to be either for members of Tashare or Historical Society. We're not trying to draw people in who are unfamiliar with either one. Is that correct?
Oh, no, we would love to draw in people who are unfamiliar with
So
either
we do
one.
want to, okay,
Yeah,
because when you
but
said
what I
we
meant
are
was
the...
people who are, we're starting, like with marketing, you always start with the inner circle and work your way out. So it's those who are, but then people who are like them are sort of the next. So people who are what we call here history enthusiasts. They're not members of HSP yet, but they share a lot of common interests with people who are. Likewise with Tyre. So yes, it moves out from there. Okay, well then I'm going to turn this back to Flora, who's going to go idea by idea looking at these kind of questions. And I'm going to say this for her now, which is she's going to be a strict timekeeper. We have to get through all 3 and have time for a conclusion today. So we're going to move it along efficiently.
Yeah, thanks so much. Great. Awesome. Excuse us as we do the mic thing. Okay. Great. So, one by one, as we discussed, we're going to think about both format and audience here. So I've heard a bunch of really excellent and to the point questions about how we define our audience, how we reach out, and how that impacts the formatting of these programs. So let's do it. All right. So let's just start with number 1. We'll go through each of them, and we're thinking about format and audience. How did you respond to this idea, and what kinds of concepts around format and audience come to mind that you're concerned with? I've already heard audience about youth, so maybe I can go ahead and put that down. Engaging a youth audience. Yes,
But
sir.
also youth being the interviewers, because I think that's what the original project was in the 1970s, I believe.
Right.
But
the introduction.
Revisit that.
Revisit who exactly? I'm sorry.
Tyre's project in the 1970s where they had oral history. So
youth
youth were the
being
ones
the-
asking the questions, right? It was high school students, so why not replicate that idea?
Okay.
With, of course, up to date with all the technology and all that, it would be a lot easier to get a lot more students involved.
So high school students as interviewers.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
interviewers.
So thinking about working with young people, speaking with other folks in the community,
Right.
defining kind of a
Your
number of those
parents.
people, but that kind of
Grandparents.
intergenerational dialogue.
Right, yeah.
Okay, fabulous. Anything else that comes to mind about a format of how we could think about testimonials, oral history? Yeah.
I've said this before, but I'm just thinking with NPR and how they have StoryCorps, and it's an interview that's archived. And maybe this is going too far, but go outside of HSP and Tashare and let's go out on the corner at whatever intersection and just try to get people to do a few second not seconds, but a couple minute interviews as they're waiting for the bus or whatever. With regards to audience, who is being left out of coming to these places like Tasher and the historical? Who is a target audience that has not come?
Okay, so attracting people from outside our immediate communities, absolutely. So a kind of expanded audience. Okay. Yes.
Audience would be teachers.
Okay. So teachers
There's
is
a
audience.
natural connection with the youth.
Okay.
Teachers, I don't want to limit it to just the Puerto Rican community of Philadelphia. I think it needs to be other parts of Philadelphia too, so it would be district-wide.
Right.
And then maybe eventually even through the state Department of Education.
Something that can go into classrooms.
Right, exactly.
You can teach, across.
There's some big questions about Puerto Ricans that needs to be clarified by all Americans. That is, that they are really have the rights as American citizens.
Because they are American citizens.
Okay. All right. So thinking about kind of the pedagogical, overall pedagogical function and how to engage both young people as well as their teachers as audiences.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I just want to really just reiterate, nothing new on it, what Mona and Henrietta said, because here at HSP we have an outreach program to high school students. Sometimes they come here and sometimes we go to the school. And it's really, I think it's really effective. So again, just to cement that idea of bringing it out to younger people, because we're all interested in the younger people aspect of it. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'm getting a really strong sense of interest in this, youth audience, and trying to think. Let's think again about how do we actually implement that on a format level. Yeah, Ariella, do you want to introduce?
Once the interviews, going by the comments that other people said, once the youth have done these interviews, could we put them in sort of like a booklet format?
Can you speak up a little bit?
Could we put the interviews once they're done into sort of a published booklet format for distribution?
In addition to an online platform.
Yeah, I was also going to add. No, that's not a problem. In addition, if these things are just if we have audio files, we could have the audio playing in the background while there's like another exhibit going on, whether it's like a photo exhibit, so that it's an audio and a visual experience kind of at the same time.
Like when the African Americanism, they had something
Yeah,
like that.
that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to make it
That's exactly
both
what I was thinking
audio
of.
and oral and visual.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna run out of the room here. It's a good problem to have. Yes.
So I'm also, there are multiple thoughts, but one of them would be if you're going into schools, that you can actually, for outreach, you can actually do a perform, and many museums and institutions do this. There's a performance that makes it an authentic performance, either by someone from usually by someone who's either a historian, an actor that is paid, or could volunteer, especially students from, and so they go into the school and they actually portray that person in a
traveling show.
It's like a traveling show, right? And they play multiple roles, so you have multiple people that are, and I think of it in historic context, so you can actually kind of do a short piece for kids that actually takes them through history with different individuals, and they portray those individuals, and then they respond to the students' questions as those individuals.
Okay, so a kind of a performative aspect that is
Yes.
in the schools, in a
Yes.
kind of school
Yes.
context. Okay.
Yes.
Cool.
You have to go back one step, and you need to have teachers in service so they know how to train students to be interviewers, and maybe even invite high schoolers and possibly middle school students in the training also. And I know it usually doesn't happen, but you could maybe have that as one event. That would be where students and teachers learning how to do proper oral histories and then that format.
Like a focus group where we invite, where we go to them and get their input as to what they need. I mean, if we're trying to do this by spring, we would have to meet with the teachers soon. Another thing is if we're engaging youth, to consider summertime, we may lose them. The teacher's not there to, hey, this is for your grade, go there in August.
Sure, these are important points, and I think, John, you had something you wanted to bring to
I
the
did. I was
conversation.
going to say, in terms of the audience, you could basically add and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the HSP's publication that's for teachers.
Right.
But that would be, in a sense, the ultimate, or another format of this, another way to, what's that? Yeah, legacies.
Okay.
That this would end up in legacies, or kind of with an eye towards having it end up in legacies. That's one. The second is, I'm going to disagree a little bit on the kind of vox populi notion, because it's like reading the comment section in the newspaper, which is kind of entertaining, but it's usually just not as informative as somebody who actually, I'll put it this way, knows what the hell they're talking about. So I would say, like, in terms of people to interview, you need community leaders. You need people who actually know that history to get a big picture, because otherwise you're just going to have noise. At least I'd be afraid you're just going to have noise. Because, and doing a good, it's like Terry Gross is really good at interviewing people. She's been at it a long time. There's a big difference between that and just the first time off. So I think, somebody who's done it and read them, there's a huge variety and a huge range of quality. And part of that is the quality of the people who are speaking, and part of it is who is interviewing them.
Right, this gets to the, topic we've discussed about, we want to have a broad and engaging audience, but we also want it to be grounded in our archival work, right? So kind of trying to balance these poles as part of the challenge and the fun, I guess, of this whole process. So I think that's a really important point, John. Thank you. Did you want to mention something, Sandy? I thought I saw your hand.
Maybe more than we can do, but I read recently that we get 47 million visitors to this city. We also have the third largest population of Puerto Ricans in the country living in this city. And I'm thinking that our program could maybe go to one of our sister institutions where they are getting some of these 47 million visitors. People coming here for the history of Philadelphia. This is important history of Philadelphia that I don't think the average person knows about. I have learned so much that I had no clue about. I would love to see us share this with the visitors that come to the city, so they can come away and they learn something they had no clue about. Most people come to Philadelphia with some idea of our history. But this is history I don't think many people know about. And I would love to share it through another organization.
And that gets to the topic of the hidden histories that came up so much last time we met. That's a really interesting point. Adia? Yes.
I kind of agree with John, but there's also a kind of aspect where I kind of disagree. I think identifying some of the key historical actors, I think is sort of a good prep work, and I can be of assistance. I'll be more than happy to volunteer my time to help out with that. But I also find value in interviewing people who are not sort of those named folks, because oftentimes those folks who are named, the people who are doing the naming don't come necessarily from the community. And as a historian, I think, it's great to have that sort of archival material from the historical actors, but the nuances of daily life of the average, Puerto Rican in the neighborhood, I also think is important to capture. So I think we can actually do both. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. And thank you for being willing to volunteer your time as we think about implementation.
Can I ask a technical question again about the grant? In terms of the length of the exhibit, might this be ongoing? Is there going to be a permanency to it? Or is it going to be a one-off kind of thing?
Good question. The actual, anything that costs money has to be done by the end of June. If there's a way it lives on because it's a published book or it's a podcast or something that people can, that's fine. But anything that costs money ends at the end of June.
Thank you. Okay. We've got a lot of interesting concepts for format and audiences here. I'm mindful that I want to wrap this aspect up in the next 5 minutes or so. Any other reflections on how we might bring to life oral history, testimonial, voices of people? Yes?
Just when Beth just said podcast, I think that might be a nice way to kind of bridge between getting leaders and regular people, because then you're really curating a collection of interviews to make it compelling and reasonably short in duration. So it's, you could get kind of a best of with appropriate music and so forth, and then it can live on.
Okay, so the idea of kind of incorporating both of these poles of the spectrum of the kind of community leaders as well as the sort of daily life of people into a curated collection. Okay, that's an interesting concept of trying to bridge that gap of audiences. Okay. Yeah, what was that, Marilyn? Sorry?
It doesn't cost that much either.
It doesn't cost that much. We've always got to think about the money. Okay. Anything else that you wanted to raise? Or do any of the technical advisors have any reflections on what we've said so far based on your own experience with programming and implementing these sorts of things?
I would only say that I would support it being somehow findable online, because I feel like the archive is the domain of the converted,
Yes.
and you want the accidental visitor.
I love that. The domain of the converted. I love a good domain of the converted. Okay, so some sort of online presence.
Consider that line stolen.
Okay. I think that gets to the concerns you raised earlier about how do we really get beyond just our own little echo chamber of the folks of us who are already converted and already really passionate about this.
Because there's a lot out there already. I mean, I literally did, video to YouTube and for the Puerto Rican, neighborhood, and there's a ton of videos out there from just individuals telling their story about, just finding their place in the community. So I think that was accidental on my part in doing that. So I agree. It's very good.
That's what I was going to ask about online. Sure, things are out there, but there has to be some way to direct people to it, because there is, as you say, millions perhaps, billions of things out there. Yeah. So having things online is great, but until you have some kind of way to bring people's attention.
A lot of younger people are just Googling.
They're Googling, exactly. We Google.
And you want to be what they find by accident.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't think I said this specifically, and that is there is a pool of money for marketing that is not part of the 17,000. So,
great. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I would just add that I was pleased to hear the idea of involving young people if that's the audience you're looking for, because there is no worse strategy than a room full of adults trying to figure out what is going to interest kids. It applies to all audiences. There's a kind of a cliche museum, there's nothing about us without us. But if we try to guess what's going to engage people under 18, we're probably going to really miss the mark.
Yes.
If we try to do that without them.
Right.
We can guess, and we're probably basing it on stuff that we saw on TV that
20 years ago or something.
20 years ago.
Carmen, did you want to follow
Well,
up?
I mean, I think that also I would love to hear from Masada, because Masada is representing that group of young people, so let's not ignore that she's in the room.
Thank you, Carmen.
I agree, it's going to be kind of difficult, and I think that for a format it should be online.
Okay.
Because nowadays if it's not online or on the phone,
exactly,
most of us are going to miss it.
Sure.
I mean, I think a website online or an app would really reach.
Okay. Okay, excellent. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Because you really could actually do it where you do an invitation for a certain time for them to log in, and they don't have to necessarily come directly to the place. But the
live streaming.
Yeah, they could actually just live stream into that time as well when we're presenting.
Okay. Did you want to add something to that?
Yes, I keep thinking about the audience, and I agree with, of course, focusing on younger people. But maybe as we go along, we can also consider youth as in college students, because they might be the ones who need to do a research project, who might want to, I don't know, continue in graduate school and do either like a more in-depth history research or who knows what, but they might need, some of them need the archives to do some project. So just consider also college students. Definitely they would, I guess, lean towards the online component. And I'm thinking also about Puerto Ricans that have been in the US for a longer time, who might, of course, be more used to speaking in English, but maybe people who are more recent migrants, or whatever you want to call them, also include something in Spanish. Something to consider is to consider both languages. And
Absolutely.
As a Spanish professor, I can tell you that if there's like a video, if there's some online component, will be definitely of interest of some professors, because we don't have a lot of the sort of the community detail, how they live, things like that, to use in the college classroom. So consider the language component.
That's an excellent point. I think if we're talking about oral history and the voice of people, it's got to be in both languages. Absolutely. And that is something to bear in mind as we think about, how I've got to pay someone to translate, that kind of thing. But that's an excellent point. Are there any other comments or observations that we can make about this topic of oral history testimonial before we pass on to topic number 2? I hope you don't feel I'm rushing you too much. Okay. Anything that any of our technical advisors or anyone wants to mention?
So the high school students did the interviews in the 70s originally? Is that what happened?
Yeah. I thought it was college students.
Yes. So some of those people would be middle-aged now, so we could have high school students interviewing the former high school students who are middle-aged. It seems like there's something beautiful to be had.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Do we have content there?
But that might be challenging, however.
Interview them. Right. So within the constraints of time and staffing, to make those identifications. I mean, I think that the original idea was to sort of revisit the oral history project, so it comes, as an integral part that as we think about this, we try to make a connection, with that original code. So, and hopefully, and probably the only people that would be accessible would be the ones that were doing the interviews, because the interviewees, they're much older and are probably gone.
Excellent point. Yeah, it would be a beautiful symmetry, but we have to bear in mind that the logistical challenges of tracking some of these folks down, but it would be lovely. Well, thank you all for this wonderful kind of brainstorming session. I'm going to move on to the second topic now, so let me just my phone is in my bag. Oh, look, here we go. Excellent, thank you. Thanks for that. I don't know if anyone can read my scribbles, but It's
been very helpful in the past, so thank you for reminding me.
Yeah, thank you, Marilyn. That's great. And thank you, Chris, for doing that. These are all wonderful ideas. Thank you so much. Okay. So. Arg. I'm so used to doing PowerPoint presentations that actually writing on the board is really exciting to me. So I'm like getting such a thrill out of this. Yeah, it is kind of pleasing, very visceral. Okay. Okay.